Welcome to the Mornings with Sue and Andy podcast for Tuesday, August 31st. We begin with a look at the current situation in Afghanistan, specifically what Canada's role will be moving forward now that our rescue mission is over and American troops have left the region. We discuss with Mercedes Stevenson, Global News Ottawa Bureau Chief and host of the West Block.
Next, we meet a Calgary doctor who's just been awarded a prestigious award for his reimagining of a standard hospital ventilator, which expands its use from just one patient to 4. We speak with Dr. Stephen Roy about his invention and get his thoughts on winning the IDEA Award, which in the past has been won by major tech giants like Apple and Tesla.
It's International Overdose Awareness Day. We hear the gripping personal story of Venetia Bro, a recovered addict whose family has been rocked by the opioid crisis. We hear how 2 of Venetia's sons are currently living on the streets addicted and get her thoughts on what needs to be done by government to help battle the growing crisis.
And finally, our travel lady is on assignment. We catch up with Leslie Cater, who is currently on the high seas. We hear what it's like to be on a cruise ship for the first time in 2 years. We speak with Leslie from her cabin on a seaborne cruise ship off the coast of Barbados.
Turmoil continues in Afghanistan, and will our nation help? What will our role be? Also, there's a lot of anger on the campaign trail. Those are some of the biggest issues tackled this week on the West Block. We're joined now by host and Global News Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stevenson. Good morning to you, Mercedes.
Hey, good morning, guys.
Thank you for taking the time with us. We'll get to the election and things heating up around the Justin Trudeau camp in a second. But first, the happenings in Afghanistan. It makes us think with hearing that the last American soldiers pulled out yesterday and our troops are now out of the region. What, if anything, can we do as a nation to help that nation in turmoil?
Well, that's a great question, and it's one that a lot of Canadians, I think, are asking themselves because there is an unusually strong emotional connection, I think, for a lot of Canadians to Afghanistan because we lost people there. Mm-hmm. We lost a lot of Canadians who fought and died, and even more who came home. And, you know, we all know veterans. We know people who've served there. It changes you. And it's very, very difficult in some cases for the families and for those individuals. So to see this happening after that kind of investment of people's whole being is very, very hard for a lot of folks. And they're wanting to help those who put their lives on the line by helping us. And we promised them that we would protect them. And now we don't know how many, but we know likely thousands are still there. The government won't officially release the numbers of how many Canadians are still in the country either, but we know there are also Canadians who are there who are afraid for their lives. And at this point, you know, I talked to the Foreign Affairs Minister and I asked him sort of what concrete things are you doing for people there now? Because the government's talking about processing paperwork. They're talking about people getting to third countries. Well, I'm hearing from people who are on the ground and they're saying, that's great, but I'm not hearing anything from the Canadian government. Even if my paperwork is processed, I have no way to get out. I left Kandahar. Many of these translators are from Kandahar because that's where Canada was. They've gone to another province in Kabul. So, you know, think about if you picked up all your stuff and went to Vancouver, right? Now you don't have any of your stuff. You don't have any of your money. And someone says, okay, well, now you have to get to the U.S. Okay. How do you do that when you don't have any means to do so? And there's actually Canadian veterans groups that are raising money. Some of these guys are and girls are selling off their motorcycles. They're selling off personal objects, personal things of value to be able to send money to their former interpreters to pay for them to stay in safe houses. One veteran who I was talking to, Special Forces, bought his interpreter diapers and baby cream. I mean, this is where it's kind of at, that you have individuals stepping into this gap that the government is trying to catch up and fill. And I did ask the Foreign Affairs Minister whether the government might give some money to these veterans groups to help them with the cost of what right now they are shouldering completely on their own to keep these interpreters safe and alive as long as possible till they can find another way to try to get them out of the country. He said he didn't have an answer with that, but essentially they were willing to take a look at it. In the meantime, he says they're negotiating with the Taliban, which a lot of people don't like to hear, but that negotiation is a hope they will actually be able to get Canadians and interpreters out of Afghanistan alive. The problem is, well, there's a very low incentive for the Taliban to go after a Canadian citizen. There's a much higher incentive for them to go after these interpreters who they see as being traitors who worked for the West. So it's the challenge of giving names to get people out. But if you start giving those names, they're also going to know exactly who you have and haven't gotten out. So trying to find safe passage for them, whether it's on buses or whatever else, to try to either get them out of the airport if it reopens under Qatar or Turkey, two countries that are trying to reopen the airspace, on civilian flights, or to put them on buses or something and try to run them out across the border through Pakistan or somewhere else. But a lot of those borders are closed, too, right now. So it's a pretty challenging situation.
Mercedes, are we the only country where we have interpreters, et cetera, who we weren't able to get out? I guess what I'm asking is it fair, the criticism that the Justin Trudeau and the Liberal government is taking right now in terms of not getting these people out earlier or staying later to get them out?
I think that there's two parts to the answer. Part one would be this is all Western countries. I don't think anybody got everybody who they wanted to get out. It was a complicated operation. Western governments who moved slowly, they keep talking about not knowing that the country was going to fall so quickly to the Taliban. That is true. However, 3 months ago, we could already tell those intelligence assessments were off because things were falling too quickly. And there have been years to bring interpreters to here in Canada and to other Western countries. Western countries have made it very, very difficult for these interpreters to immigrate. They have required all kinds of very difficult paperwork the government of Afghanistan sometimes wasn't willing to give, things like passports. And so we've been pretty slow because there was no urgency in moving them. And that is absolutely the United States, the UK, France, Canada, all these countries. In terms of Canada's particular performance after the government fell, I think is another question. Yes, did the people on the ground work around the clock to get people out? Absolutely. But we didn't run our first flight until the Thursday when the Americans started running flights on Monday, and we left the next Thursday. So we left before others. We pulled our embassy out. Other countries had their embassy working from the airport processing paperwork. So we ran into a situation where even where there was Canadian planes, there wasn't anybody on the ground who could process the paperwork to get people on the planes. So I think there's a lot of questions about how this unfolded on a political and bureaucratic level in Canada that there is accountability on, because we're talking about people's lives on the line. Would we ever have gotten everybody out? Doubtful. Could we have gotten more people out than we did? That's the question that I think the government has to answer.
All right. Just before we let you go, can you stick around for 2 more minutes, or can we get one more quick question for you right now?
Sure, guys. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask you about, Justin Trudeau out in the West, and not shocking. He doesn't have a lot of fans, perhaps, in Alberta. But what's going on in Ontario with Liberal leader Justin Trudeau? I find it quite shocking. I would have thought he'd have a much more smooth reception.
Yeah, so I think you have to kind of sort out where he's at in the polls. And by the way, he's not doing great in Ontario at all. His trend line is not good in the election. If you're a Liberal at this point, that could change. Keep in mind, in campaigns, 2.5 weeks is like forever. So he could turn this around. Not a good trend line. But what you're seeing at those protests is very particular. They're very organized. We don't know exactly how they're doing this. Sometimes we see the same person at more than one. The anger, the screaming, the images of a party leader next to a noose. Some of these are not things that are representative of the larger anger that there may be against Trudeau, or the larger discontent in people who aren't going to vote for him. So there's sort of this very small, vocal, loud group that is following the Liberals around to these public campaign stops that they're making. And then there's the larger voter discontent with people who, for some reason, are looking at Justin Trudeau and so far aren't seeing somebody who they want to vote back in. That could all change. But I think we have to be careful when we talk about the people who are involved in those very particular, very aggressive protests versus, for example, someone who we saw show up at the housing announcement who was yelling, well, you've had 6 years to do something. It was a much more kind of normal protest that you expect to see. That said, these same people who are protesting Justin Trudeau right now, some of them have protested Doug Ford. Some have protested Jason Kenney. These are people who are unhappy with government regulations and pandemic handling. And that anger has actually crossed party lines basically into whoever is in government, but we don't tend to talk about it in that level of depth. We're still trying to get a sense, really, of who some of these people are that show up on the campaign trail. Some of them are not too keen to talk to the media, as you can imagine. They don't like the media, but we're really trying to get a sense of who it is and where it's coming from and why and how. So it's certainly a different campaign trail in that sense. Typically, campaigns, by the way, will try to avoid these. So far, the Trudeau campaign hasn't done that. They've said, you know what, we're going to continue on. We're not going to be pushed off of our message. And that in itself is also creating controversy in Canadian politics.
Yeah, and I think that message from some of those people is so extreme that maybe it benefits him in the end. Anyway, great conversation. Thank you, as always, for joining us, Mercedes. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Mercedes Stephenson, Global News Ottawa Bureau Chief and host of The West Block. Well, a Canadian company has won a prestigious IDEA Award. As COVID numbers rise again, a Calgary ICU doctor has been awarded international acclaim for finding a way to use hospital ventilators more efficiently and for more patients. Joining us is that innovator, Dr. Stephen Roy. Good morning, doctor. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Congratulations, first of all. And to begin with, can you start by giving us a bit of an explanation of what exactly a ventilator does? We've been hearing that word throughout the pandemic, but what does it do?
Basically, a ventilator breathes for a person who is so sick that they cannot breathe on their own effectively.
All right, so let's talk about how it works on one person. You 1 unit per person. You decided there could be a better way. So how does your system work to provide ventilators to 4 people from that one?
Basically, our device allows the ventilator to build pressure for 4 people and divide that pressure between them in a way that allows the flow to become independent of each other, and that allows the 4 people to both have a ventilator breathe for them, as well as provides some of the safety features that the ventilator normally has for one person, and retains them in a slightly modified way to allow the ventilator still to detect problems in the breathing circuit.
Doctor, I'm sure this is not a MacGyver, duct tape and a paperclip kind of idea. So is the expense then, or the lack thereof, I guess, worth it to be able to expand the use of a single ventilator? So
the cost of the device is about a thousandth of the cost of a ventilator. So though clearly a ventilator per person is ideal, in the setting of planning for a disaster or other ventilator crises, it's a much lower expense and allows the ventilators to be utilized when there are not very many other options.
All right, so you've been recognized because, like you say, this is kind of changes the game. You're taking one piece of equipment, spreading it to 4 different patients, winning the prestigious IDEA Award. So tell us what the IDEA Award is and what it means to somebody like you to be recognized with it.
Well, the IDEA Award is the International Design Excellence Award, and this is a very big award for me to be receiving. It is an award that Apple received for the iPod and for the iPhone, and Tesla received for its Model S car. So to be put in the same category as these kinds of very innovative companies is a huge honor and a huge boost to our business.
Wow, that is very, very impressive. And you talked about this adaptation being a sort of a thousandth of what the ventilator costs. We should let people know in dollars and cents. A ventilator costs about $70,000. This piece that you've created is about $50 per patient. So it really, obviously, the recognition you're getting is well deserved. What does this mean moving forward? Do you see this then being something that'll be shared around the world in various countries, for example, that might not be able to afford ventilators?
Yeah, we see it being used in kind of 3 different settings. The first is in countries like Canada when planning for the unexpected, essentially. At the beginning of the pandemic in the United States, there were thousands of ventilators that could not be used because they had not been maintained, even though they were in the storage, in the stock for the stockpile of emergency ventilators. they weren't ready to be used, and so they couldn't be. And so in places like Canada, where we have such a huge mass of land, having a lot of ventilators is good, but if they're in the wrong place when they're needed, then they can't be used. So we foresee the device being used in countries like Canada, like this in this kind of setting. In other countries, in developing countries where buying a ventilator is such a prohibitive cost that the country may only be able to afford a couple. It's notable that there are a few countries in Africa, for example, where there are literally no ventilators, or where there are only a handful of ventilators in the entire country. So in these kinds of countries where buying another ventilator is more or less impossible, this kind of device would really allow a hospital system to better serve an influx of patients in the setting of a pandemic. And then finally, in military or humanitarian relief settings, we think this would be very helpful in a field hospital when planning for what ventilator supplies are needed for a healthcare response. So those are kind of the three situations or demographics that we see utilizing our product.
Dr. Roy, thank you so much for your time, and congratulations on the prestigious IDEA Award. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. People who would like to vote for us for the People's Choice Award for IDEA can go to idea2021.vote.
Look at you. I like
Perfect.
that. We'll get as many people there as we can. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
That's Dr. Stephen Roy, a Calgary ICU doctor.
Today is International Overdose Awareness Day. Now, we've seen the opioid crisis grow throughout the pandemic, but politicians don't seem to be talking about it much during this current election campaign. So what should we be asking of our leaders on this topic? We're going to chat and ask Venetia Bro. She is a mom of three who is a recovered addict herself, has two children currently living in addiction. And joining us now is Venetia, the founder of the Terminator Foundation. Hi, Venetia. How are you?
Hi, good morning, Sue. How are you?
Excellent. Thanks for joining us. Can you tell us just a quick bit about your backstory? You and your daughter both recovered. Your boys, where are they at, though?
So I actually have four kids, and it was my second oldest daughter, Eden. Yeah, that is in long-term recovery now, as well as myself. And both my boys are still currently struggling. This past year has been a bit rough.
Okay, for those, not in your situation, for those, who don't know a lot about opioids, Venetia, can you tell us about how easy it is to get your hands on opioids and ultimately how long it takes to get hooked on something like this?
Well, I don't think there's one, just one way to measure it. There's not just one measuring stick for every single person. And I think that's really important to remember too, that it is a very complex issue. And so, how long it takes one person to become addicted compared to someone else it could be, totally different time frames. So, but as far as how easy it is to get, to have access to it, it's a lot easier than I think, as parents and as families and just, as individuals than what we realize. Like it's not an issue. There's no, it's easy. It's easier than we'd like to think. I'll put it that way.
Scary thought for sure. Venetia, addiction is something most of us, luckily enough, don't know a lot about. So when you're in addiction, do you know you're an addict? Are your sons aware?
I think at this stage of the game, I'd say yes, they are. I think they sometimes still think that they can, that certain drugs are okay, like they're, like for example, marijuana, and especially now too with it being legalized and stuff like that, it's sort of like the same as what we see with alcohol, right? Now that it's legal and it's more socially acceptable and stuff like that. It makes it easier to move that bar on what's acceptable use versus, maybe I'm kind of crossing some lines here. It's just easier for those lines to get blurred.
This is a crisis that is unfortunately, right in your backyard, Venetia. So I'm wondering, from your position, what would you like to hear from politicians? We've got a federal election basically in weeks now. What needs to be done?
Oh man, this is a crisis like this, and this crisis hasn't gone away. Even with COVID and stuff like that. Yes, obviously that's a crisis too. But this crisis has been here with us for a while now, and if anything, it has just amped up. It hasn't gotten better; it's gotten worse, and COVID has only heightened that. And I think, one of the things I will say is that this past year, I had to end up putting both my boys into treatment. They voluntarily had to go because they're both adults. But this was the first time, I know for me personally, that I didn't have to pay for treatment. And so, one thing I will say in having, been in long-term recovery for a long time, some of the inroads that have been made for easier access, to the beds and stuff like that, came within the last 18 months with the fees being removed off the beds. And for someone like me that is directly impacted, normally I have to pay for treatment. And that was the first time I wasn't having to scramble to come up for money to get my boys into treatment. And so what needs to be done? Honestly, I think if for us just to leave this issue at the door of government, I think that's naive, and I think it's irresponsible on all of us. This is an issue that's going to take all of us, not just our government and not just what they're able to do, but all of the structures that are in place. Every single person. This does impact more people than what we even realize. Like the numbers they're astronomical, and they are increasing. And we're going to see an influx of that even more as we start to, just even probably over this next year, the mental health and stuff that, people that have been impacted by COVID and, the lockdown and everyone's health and stuff like that. It's still a little bit scary.
It is scary. We've made some strides, obviously, is what you're saying. Much more work needs to be done. Thank you for your perspective. Always appreciate talking to you, Venetia. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Sue.
Venetia Bro is the founder and CEO of the Terminator Foundation. They've got their big annual 5K for youth addiction awareness coming up September 25th. So terminatorfoundation.com and overdoseday.com for more info. Different rules are in place to travel to different countries, but the travel industry is beginning to open up once again. So let's find out what cruising looks like. Live from a business trip on board a cruise ship near Antigua, we are joined this morning by the travel lady, Leslie Cater. Hi, Leslie.
Hi, good morning, Sue.
A business trip, hey? Okay, we'll keep it at that. Yep, I know you have to do your research. We appreciate it.
Yes.
Tell us what it's been like, Leslie, to fly internationally and then to get on a cruise ship once again.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting. First of all, the preparation was extensive. I checked and double-checked everything. You've got to assemble, obviously, your vaccination records. We don't have a certificate in Alberta now, so I got mine notarized from my local MLA. And then, of course, you've got to have the COVID test, which has to be a PCR test. There were health and questionnaire forms I had to fill in for the cruise line Seabourn and also for Barbados, stressing that I was actually in transit for Barbados. Oh, here's the safety briefing. You can hear that going off in the background.
I'm sure you know how to stay safe on a ship.
Yes. So going forward with that, I apologize. They're doing cruise safety briefings here. So getting into Barbados, first of all, the flight from Toronto to Barbados, I felt much better with doing that because I realized that most of the people on the flight were double vaccinated because that's a requirement going into Barbados. So that was feeling pretty safe. But getting into Barbados as well, there's numerous checks there. We had to go through, show our vaccination certificate a few times, show the health questionnaire we'd completed. Finally, we got on the transfer to the cruise port, but not before realizing that Air Canada had left our bags in Toronto.
Oh, no.
Now, I'm on a business trip here, so I just can't do the week with my Lulu leggings and my T-shirt that I was traveling in. So fortunately, I have travel insurance, which covers me for lost baggage. So I've had a little bit of a spend at the shop on board Seabourn. The peculiar situation is that I can't go ashore to go shopping because everything is only with tours. You can't just pop off the ship and go and have a shop. So that was a bit of a downer on that. But seeing that we're on board now, we got onto the ship fine. We had to do a rapid antigen test outside of the ship on the port and sit there and wait 20 minutes while they checked for the test. And we got the all clear. We were so happy. Got on board that ship and into our beautiful stateroom. And there are only 86 guests on board on a ship that normally accommodates 400. And we have just been so spoiled to death. There are 350 staff on board.
Wow.
Yeah, we had an amazing dinner last night. No masks required on the ship because everybody has been double vaccinated, double tested, but the staff serving us are still wearing masks, so to keep our situation good. Last night I had dinner with the chief engineer, and he said since the beginning of COVID, he's been very busy. They've been outfitting all of the airflow on the ship. The only airflow is from outside, inside. There's no recycled air going from cabin to cabin. Brand new HEPA filters, ultraviolet screening that the air has to go through.
So the changes, we got to leave it there for time, but the changes are present. They're doing the protocols, and we can't wait. We have to leave it there for time, but we can't wait to hear the end result in the next couple of weeks for sure, Leslie. Thank you so much for the update.
Thank you for your time, guys. Check out my Facebook. I've got some videos there of my experience.
Okay,
Good
great
stuff. She is Leslie Cater, the Travel Lady, online at thetravellady.ca and on Facebook issues. Thanks for downloading and listening to the podcast.
Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review for free at Apple Podcast, Google Play, or wherever you find your podcasts.
And tune in to Mornings with Sue and Andy from 5:30 to 9 every weekday morning on 770 CHQR.